This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to author Lindsay Cameron. Lindsay worked as a corporate lawyer for many years in Vancouver and New York City before leaving the law behind to write books. Her first novel, Biglaw, was published in 2015, and she joins me today on Uncorking a Story to chat about her latest book, No One Needs to Know. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, Lindsay, and I'm curious to know, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, growing up, I always loved writing. I was always writing poems and short stories, but it wasn't something that I thought I could make a career out of. And so I did what a lot of people who like writing do. I went to law school, and I was practicing law in New York, and I did that for a number of years. And it was really I enjoyed it, but I knew it was something that I didn't want to be doing long term, but I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to pivot to be doing. And then one night I was sitting in my office. It was very late. It was like, we're talking like midnight. And I just started to really think that the practice of law in reality is so different than what it is in the movies and books, which are portrayed as so glamorous. And I was sitting there thinking, it's such a stark difference. Somebody should really write a book about it. And I kind of had this aha moment that I wanted to write a book about it. And so I grabbed a notebook. I probably in a overtired fit, was crazed fit, was scratched down a bunch of notes in a notebook, just things that my observations at the firm and experiences I'd had. And I continued to write in that notebook while working, probably for about the next year. And then it sort of hit me that if I didn't leave law and try to write this book now, I was probably never going to do it. And so I left my job and used that notebook to write my first novel, which was Biglaw. And I'm on my third novel now and haven't gone back to law.
You know, it's so interesting. I've talked to so many lawyers on this program who have done exactly what you've done, or they're trying to do what you've done, which is make a living doing something other than law.
Yeah.
And I always like to dig into, what is that overlap between, and you mentioned it yourself, a lot of people who are good at writing, go into law. What is that overlap between being a writer, being a storyteller, and being an attorney?
I mean, I think it's like a certain personality type where you are creative and love writing, but you're also type A and practical. And so the practice of law does have a lot of writing. It doesn't turn out to be creative writing, but it has a lot of drafting. I think the type A personality thinks oh, I couldn't do the writing thing. I need the job that is paying. And so I think it just has to do with that you have those two elements. You have a creative writing side, but you also have that type A personality that is just driven towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know also with trial attorneys, there is a story of a case that you have to present, and so you are kind of tapping into a little bit of storytelling when you're doing that. Were you a trial attorney or were you
No, I was corporate law, which there's no story there. You're drafting contracts. I often get asked if my skills as a corporate attorney could translate into writing fiction. And that is no. In fact, I had to kind of remove a lot of those skills because when you're drafting a contract, you don't want to leave any room for ambiguity. So you say the same thing in different ways, 10 different times in that contract. And in early drafts, I was really lawyering it up, really over explaining my story to the point where there would be no ambiguity. The reader gets it, but that's not very entertaining. And so, yeah, those skills that I had as a lawyer that were drummed into me as a lawyer, I had to remove from myself when I
Yeah.
started to write fiction.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of people find that as well, especially if you come out of academia too. The type of writing you're doing in academia is so different than, writing, what you have to do to write a novel. But it keeps editors employed, which is a good thing.
It's a good thing.
I want to go back in time and just role play for a second, or tell me how a certain conversation went down. So you're a lawyer, you're in New York City. It's very lucrative career. It leads to good things. And then you tell somebody in your life, you know what, I'm going to just stop doing this. I'm going to write a novel, which I've never done before.
Sure.
Probably, I don't know if you're thinking that novelists make a lot of money. I have firsthand knowledge that it's very difficult to make a living on, on advances and royalties. But what was that conversation like? I mean, who did you talk to first about this big life decision that you've made?
Probably my husband, I talked to about it. And I was doing corporate law kind of pre-market crash. And so it was incredibly busy. Like when I say that I was at the office at midnight, that was a very common thing. Like midnight, one, sometimes all night if it was right before the signing or closing of a deal. So like the hours were long. It was very grueling. And so when I was talking to my husband about leaving, he was very supportive. I mean, I think he had no idea whether I could actually write a book because I had never done it. But he was supportive of me leaving that life behind just because it was so grueling. So I talked to him about it. But honestly, I didn't tell a lot of people what I was leaving to do. Like I didn't tell like when I resigned from my firm, I just said that I was just leaving the law. Really, it was like my husband and my close family who knew that I was going to write a book. I think I just wasn't sure it was something I was ever going to get published, but it just was something that I felt like I needed to do. I didn't really want people always saying, "How's the book going?" every time you see them, because I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to go. So I was very private about it in terms of like, even close friends didn't know. And I remember um, when I got an agent with the first book, I told a friend, I've been writing this book. And she was like, "That's why I always see you in Starbucks with a laptop." Like, nobody really knew. So it was just something that I just wasn't sure was ever gonna be seen to completion. I wasn't exactly um confident about it, but I'm glad that it was.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get through the first draft?
The first draft was probably about 2 years because soon after I left, I had a baby. And so I wrote while I was pregnant and then basically shelved it for about 6 months when I had a baby, just because that's sort of survival mode with a new infant. And then I was able to write during his naps and stuff. So it was probably over the course of 2 years.
Okay. I mean, kids really do cramp your style like that,
They
right? I
really
mean,
do.
it I had 3
It
kids at
really
20.
take up your writing time, I can tell you that. I was trying to sleep when baby slept rather than write.
Yeah, you have to adjust your schedule to theirs. I know
Mhm.
that I know that well.
Yeah.
And then going through the publishing process, finding an agent, how did you how did you go about doing that?
Well, actually, one of the first friends I told that I was writing this book was a woman who I had worked with at my firm, and she had a literary agent. She actually was doing cookbooks, and so I said to her, "I've written this novel," and she was very excited about it. Given the content it's a little bit like a Devil Wears Prada in a law firm, um, and she said, "I would like to send it to my agent," which I was excited to sort of get feedback from an agent. I thought, well, this will be a great first step. And then she sent it to her agent, and that agent really loved it and then offered me representation. So I had a very quick introductory to the finding an agent process. And I just turned out to be very lucky.
You didn't have to go through that humbling process of querying 100 agents and receiving 100 rejections, huh?
No. But there's rejection along the way in a lot of other ways. So I definitely, as a writer, have experienced rejection.
Of course. Yeah, it comes with the territory. Rejection. I like to, one of the lessons I've learned just by talking to so many authors and writing my own stuff is, if you don't have a thick skin, if you can't handle rejection, if you can't handle some criticism, this is not the right business for you.
Absolutely. Like there's rejection along the way. And then, when it's published, if you ever dare go on Goodreads, there's definitely going to be somebody who has, a major problem with your book. So a thick skin is a requirement.
Yeah. I would love to know like who these people are, like who they really are. Are they real people? And what are their real motivations? Are they really trying to help other people, guide towards something to read, or are they just trying to take out their own personal frustrations, shortcomings on somebody they don't even know?
There's certainly people with, positive motivation of helping people find books that they like. And then there are some times where I'm just like, especially the ones that start with, I never read this genre and I hated this book or whatever. And you're like, but you don't like the genre.
Right. Why would you like a book in that genre if you don't read
exactly.
Oh, people, what can you do? What can you do? Well, let's talk about No One Needs to Know. What can you share with us about that book?
Well, No One Needs to Know is my second suspense novel, and it's set on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And the residents there all love to use this anonymous neighborhood forum called Urban Myth. And Urban Myth is a place where they can go to talk anonymously about neighborhood gossip. They can unburden their conscience and confess something they've always wanted to confess. They can, tell a secret they've always wanted to tell. And they can do this because all of their posts are anonymous. But when Urban Myth is hacked and the true identity of the people behind the posts is made public, the neighborhood is really rocked, and some people will do anything to keep their secrets hidden.
Interesting. How did you come up with this idea of Urban Myth? It sounds like it's something that could exist.
Well, and kind of did. I came up with this idea. I was actually working on my first book when the initial kind of spark of an idea came. I was a new mom, and I went to one of these neighborhood new parent meetups. And one of the other parents there had said, "Have you heard about this anonymous forum for new parents?" And she said, "It's highly entertaining." And I was so curious because I could not imagine what would be entertaining about something like that. So I went and I created an account. And I was expecting to see, parents kind of crowdsourcing an issue that they were too embarrassed to talk about with their peers. And there was some of that, but what there was so much more of was people who were using this forum to unburden their conscience, to just confess something they really were wanting to talk about, neighborhood coaches or affairs that people were having. Like, it was just fascinating to me. And I started to wonder about the people behind the posts. And I also just couldn't believe that they were so trusting of this forum. And then fast forward a few years, and there was the infamous Ashley Madison hack, where the personal information of people who had gone on to find extramarital affairs was made public. And there was a lot of talk in the media about that these people had trusted this site to keep their information private. And I just thought back to that anonymous forum that I had been reading. And I thought, gosh, what if that was hacked and the real identity of those people was made public? And so that was the original sort of aha moment with an idea. But it wasn't until years later that I actually started writing it.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating idea. But what I love is taking this real life thing, right? And then just being curious about it, marrying it with this, Ashley Madison data breach and kind of seeing where that takes you. I think authors have that as a superpower. Their curiosity is a superpower. Not all heroes wear capes, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I am a very curious person, and I often, there can be sort of 50 book ideas going on in my mind at the same time. And it's usually the ones that are lingering 2 years, 4 years later that I'm like, okay, like I want to explore that in a book.
Yeah. Yeah. You just kind of plant that seed, water it, let it grow,
Mhm.
and you could always come back to it.
Yeah.
Because if you try and chase down every idea you have, you're not gonna have any time to sleep.
No, that's true. And you have to they've got to percolate in there at least for me, they have to percolate. I'm so impressed with authors who come up with an idea, start writing right away. That's not me. They percolate in the back of my mind for years and sort of almost are asking me to write about them, you know?
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned before was, wanting to write about the law or a law firm from a point of view that's a little bit more authentic than maybe what's portrayed on TV. What how did you find doing that? I mean, did you out any big secrets about working in law firms, or what what was that
Well, I mean,
exploration like?
I tried not to make anything too recognizable in terms of specific people or anything. They were mostly a compilation of people I had encountered. But I realized when I was working and talking to other people at other firms, especially in New York, but really in other cities as well, is that the experience at these large law firms is the same, at all of these places. The grueling hours, the toxic personalities that come with that. We were all experiencing the same thing. Um, and so I knew that it wasn't going to be a situation where this was only my experience and people couldn't relate or see that had happened to them as well. That it was a book that was going to be talking about that this is the experience kind of across the board. And in terms of we talk about, I mentioned Goodreads before. I had gone on to Goodreads after that book came out, and there was a lot of people who were like, "Oh my gosh, this was exactly my experience too. This person has to have worked at one of these firms." So, um, I like to think that I gave the other side of it, like the non-glamorous, um, just more real life side of it.
Yeah, my twin brother is a lawyer. He's a corporate lawyer. And he had a very hard time at one point in time in his career dealing with being bullied by somebody in the firm.
Yeah,
And it caused him to leave. He wound up leaving that firm,
yeah.
join another one, which seems to be a little bit more humane in its approach to human resources and people.
Well, you can definitely find the humane ones. They tend not to be the larger firms, is
Yeah.
from my experience. And I don't know what it is about. Maybe it's the hours and the lack of sleep. I don't know what it is about the industry that does attract just certain toxic personalities. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that there would be a bullying situation in a law firm. There is just, um, you know, big egos at play, and that happens.
Yeah. Well, one way I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is by asking a couple pop culture questions. So I'm curious, when you were growing up, thinking about your childhood, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV?
Oh gosh. Uh, this is maybe going to age me, these questions. But let's see. I loved Family Ties. I loved Who's the Boss.
Oh
Um,
yeah, that's right in my wheelhouse.
yeah, yeah. I'm fully Gen X. Those are probably my two favorites. So I also liked Cheers. I still like to watch repeats of Cheers.
Sure. Cheers
Um,
holds up. I
those
mean,
are-
that show really
it
does
holds
hold up.
up.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I love Family Ties too. That was such a great show. And the juxtaposition of the hippie parents and the conservative son. I mean, to me,
Yes.
that was just a brilliant idea. Brilliant
Yes, loved
idea.
that one.
What about law? I mean, there are so many TV shows about the legal profession. Was there
Mhm.
anyone that you felt you were either A, drawn to for whatever reason, or B, really nailed what it's like to be in a law firm?
I don't have a good answer for that, only because I avoid law shows. Like I even still do today, because I do find that I can be so critical of them. Like, just in terms of that doesn't happen. Like the first year associate who's suddenly like sitting down with the biggest client the firm has. I'm like,
Right.
that would never happen. The first year associate would be there like taking the notes, and the partner would be in there, or they're running a trial. So I tend to stay away from those shows. Maybe there is one that has somehow found an authenticity, but I haven't watched it because I just can't do law shows.
Fair enough. My neighbor across the street is a detective in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we'll watch like a cop show, and he'll just be like, "This doesn't happen."
Yeah.
He's like, "You don't get DNA back in like 2 hours."
Yes, exactly.
The old cheek
No,
swab.
I know. And it can like ruin the show for you. And the thing is, as a fiction writer, I do understand there is some suspending disbelief that you are either watching or reading fiction. But sometimes with those law shows, I just can't suspend it that much. I'm like, no, it wouldn't happen.
Right.
My husband's a lawyer too, and so we'll just sort of sit there and be like, that's not the way it is. And then it's just not enjoyable. We
Right.
just can't watch those shows.
Right. What about music? What did you like listening to growing up?
My gosh. Uh Now I'm sort of blanking on it was definitely like top 40 at the time. Well, Madonna would have been a big one for me at the time. Um, all that kind of 80s top 40 hits.
Sure. Maybe a little Cyndi Lauper in there.
Cyndi Lauper, definitely Cyndi Lauper. Loved her. Um, and then my brother listened to a lot of like the hair metal bands, and so that would be playing at our house too.
Well, there you go. Nothing wrong with little Def Leppard, Motley Crue,
Yes,
Poison.
exactly.
I've seen them all.
Yeah. Have you
Uh,
really?
I have, yeah. Actually, well, no, I haven't seen Motley Crue. I've seen Def Leppard and Poison.
Yeah.
Um,
That would have both of those would have been playing at my house.
how about things you've learned about yourself? Having sort of left the legal profession behind, becoming a writer. I know it's a very introspective. It is a career that requires some introspection. What have you learned about yourself as you've started writing and have had a blooming literary career?
In terms of my work style, I realize I work better with deadlines. Like when I first left to write, and I did have a baby during that time, but I was just sort of very loose. Like in terms of writing was like a hobby. Like I didn't carve out the time for it. It was like if there was time in the day for it, then I would do it, and if there wasn't, then I wouldn't. And um, that would take quite a long time. And with my next book, I had to like institute some deadlines. I am just a person who like, given free rein will just ignore the work that I need to do. So I realize in terms of my work style that I am a person who needs to give myself some deadlines. And I also learned it's very hard to like your career is very much your part of your identity. And it's very hard to shift your identity when you've shifted your career. For a long time, like at a cocktail party, someone would say, "Well, what do you do?" Um, I would say, "Well, I used to be a lawyer, but now I write books." And it's only probably in the last year that I've dropped the I used to be a lawyer. Like now I'm just like, oh, I'm a writer. And that was a big identity shift for me.
Sure, I can imagine. I can imagine. And just to wrap up, if you could, I like to call this question "Dear Younger Me." If you could write a letter to your younger self, what are some of the things you might tell the younger Lindsay?
I would probably tell her to go into writing earlier. Part of me wishes that I had started quite a bit earlier and just trusted that I did have a passion for it. I did like it, and it was something that I could pursue and didn't have to worry about whether or not I could be a success in it. Like it's something that I wish that I'd pursued earlier, and I am glad that I did it later in life. But if I could tell younger Lindsay, it would be just to trust that passion and pursue it earlier.
There you go. Well, we've been talking to Lindsay Cameron. Lindsay's latest book is No One Needs to Know, her second thriller, if I remember that correctly from earlier in our conversation. It is available wherever books are sold. Lindsay, if people want to get in touch with you on social media, do you have any social media that you're active on? You want to share some handles with us?
I do. My Instagram is Lindsay Cameron Author, and then my Twitter is Lindsay J. Cameron.
There you go. All right. I'll be sure to put those in the show notes along with a link to the book so people can easily pick it up right from the show notes. Lindsay, thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.